Hello everybody, welcome back to another light novel review. Today I am going to be talking about volume number 2 in Kanata Yanagino's light novel series, The Faraway Paladin. This one's subtitled The Archer of Beast Woods. So in this volume, Will sets out from the city where he was raised by Blood, Gus, and Mary, and he's setting out into the world to fulfill the mission that he has dedicated himself to the goddess Gracefiel, that he will bring solace and comfort to the people in the world and deliver them from like the demon scourge and everything else. He sets off into this world and finds himself in this massive woodland that is besieged by demons and beasts. And he discovers that there are pockets like villages in this area that are mainly like the people that didn't really fit in anywhere else. Even some people that were fleeing like a former life and everything else. That this area where Will is has been only recently started to be repopulated because the demons, after that whole war, because of everything that went down there, pretty much humanity retreated from this part of the world. So we see the beginnings of villages, we see the beginnings of society in this area, and Will decides that this is going to be the place where he's going to make his first claim and his first acts to try and rescue these people and make their lives better so that they can make a home for themselves. Now, in this book, we have an expansion, of course, of our cast. In book number 1, we really only had the 4 characters. You know, Will and his 3 parents. And it was very much an origin story. The story of how this infant is raised and trained and built up to be to the point where he now leaves and goes out into the world. This book, of course, is now that transition part. It is the part where the boy is now more of a man, and he begins to create a group of individuals around him that will push forward to the point where the boy ends up becoming legend. At least that's where I see this going. This seems to be a really good setup for this, and this novel series is the closest thing to high fantasy that J-Novel has. I mean, it's really probably one of the closest books that we have to high fantasy in light novels released in general, as I kind of look back at my shelf and look at all the ones that I have read. Probably Goblin Slayer is the next closest, but this one even feels more like high fantasy than Goblin Slayer, and I think maybe that's just because there was so much world building that occurred in the first book, and you know, taking a look at the magic system and the religious system and everything else. And in volume number 2, like I said, we now have this character growing. So now we've had our formation in book 1. Now we're having his first steps beginning to grow as a person. And so this book has a lot of really strong character building moments. It has Will stumbling because he really has spent most of his life with only 3 people, his parents, and even in his life before that, because remember this is a reincarnation type story, in his life before that, when he was a modern person in Japan, he was a shut-in that essentially cut all ties with society and pretty much just died a lonely, unfulfilled life. And so he really isn't very socially adept, which leads to all sorts of little funny moments, and of course, as I said, leads to a lot of these character building moments as well, as Will starts to realize that, you know, sure, I'm pretty good with magic and I'm strong and I know how to fight, but really, like, I kind of suck when it comes to dealing with people. So there are all these lessons that he is still learning. And I think it's probably that's one of the reasons that even though Will is definitely a strong character, like, and I mean strong, like physically, magically, like, you know, characters that we start saying are OP, right? Even though we can make an argument that Will is approaching that level of being OP, he never feels that way. And I think it's because he keeps making mistakes, because he feels more human in that sometimes he will say the wrong things, sometimes he will make the wrong assumptions. you know, even in the battles that occur in this book, and there are quite a few of them, I mean, there's quite a number of sort of little action bits throughout the book. Even in those battles, it never really feels like Will would succeed if he was all alone. Even though he's strong, sure, there's been a really good balance struck in terms of having a character who is definitely stronger than average, who we know is he's being set up to be this really central, legendary, heroic character. So, I mean, it kind of figures that he's a bit better than everyone else. But at the same time, this book makes it so clear that he's not going to accomplish that alone. And I really liked that. That I think that's one of the things that this series, like, I was so nervous coming out of volume number 1 because I was like, you know what? There's no harems. The characters are actually like developed and fleshed out because we really only had, you know, this small group of characters, and the world building was really good. The magic system, this is probably one of my favorite magic systems in terms of a light novel series, because it's simple, but it really makes sense when you combine it into the rest of the world and how the world works. And even like the religious system getting a good build up and everything else, and how that ties into society, culture, the magic system. All of those things came together in the first volume, and it made me so hopeful about what this series would be. And I was nervous what was going to happen here, but really this one delivered. Again, we have the closest character that we get to Will is a male half-elf named Manel, and he's got a half-decent backstory to him. We could say he's a bit of a tsundere, because he kind of is, but, you know, it still works because his backstory supports his behavior. And the other characters that Will meets, they're very strong characters. I wouldn't say they get fleshed out quite as much. This really book is about that core team of Will and Manel, and building up sort of his follower base and trying to deal with this threat in the woods and everything else, and Will learning to deal with people, Will learning to accept people, Will learning how to work with people, because he really hasn't up to this point, and he didn't in his previous life. The other thing that I really liked about this series is that the closest thing that we get to a tropey sort of light novel-y thing is this whole reincarnation type thing. And in a lot of other light novels, that is used to give the character an edge, because they're like, well, I know technology or science and such that the people here are ignorant of, so therefore I can accomplish these things. That really isn't what Will's backstory serves. It is there thematically to give him a kick in the ass. That's really that's why it's there. It is there so that when Will struggles, when Will has difficulty, when Will thinks, you know what, it would be so much easier just to stop. It is that memory of that previous life, that sense of grief about wasting that life, that kickstarts Will back into action. Or, you know, when he has some revelatory moments about why he feels a certain way or why he's thinking a certain way, he's able to connect that to not only the life that he's had so far, but in this world, but also his previous life. So in a lot of ways, that previous life only acts as motivation and only acts as a way of, you know, we often talk about hindsight being 20/20. Well, because we look back on our life and we are like, if we had only known then what we know now. Well, that's what this book is in a lot of ways. It's Will going, well, because I lived that way, I know where that goes. I know what that is. So that's why I'm not going to live that life here in this world that way. And it's a really powerful message. And it works really well, I think, with this very high fantasy type setting, and, you know, this character who has a very noble mission, but still has faults, still has failings, and who is learning not just about in this world, but is able to kind of look and say, well, there's a model of another way of living, and I don't want to go there again. overall, this is a really, really good series. It is well written. The descriptions, the battle scenes are well orchestrated. There were a couple times in this volume that I thought the pacing was a little bit off. Certainly in no way detrimental to the overall reading experience of the book. There was just a couple times where it just kind of felt like we had some good momentum and then all of a sudden we pulled way back a little too much. That was my feeling on it. Some of you may feel differently. There was one sort of moment that Will had a really big sort of self-revelatory moment. I don't want to spoil it. I felt like that happened a little quick, but the payoff on it was awesome. And you'll probably know exactly what I mean when you get there. But again, like, that's what I mean. Like, I would have initially these misgivings about something, but very quickly it would turn around and I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, that's cool. Or in that particular case, when it all played out, I was like, wow, that's really a huge thing now. And I'm glad that the character went through this and had this realization about himself. So overall, really, really good volume. Not much to nitpick. Like I said, even the stuff that I would say in terms of the pacing, it very quickly writes itself, so in no way does it destroy the book. If you love high fantasy, this is definitely the light novel series to pick up. It is a really, really strong series, and that continues to ignore the light novel tropes. Like, we still have no harem, which I'm glad because I think that aspect would ruin this series. So we have no harem, which is great because we're not trying to shoehorn a genre that really doesn't belong in this book. The characters are very well fleshed out. They have good backstories. Even the characters that haven't been given those backstories, I get the sense that will come. There's still fun characters and interesting characters to have around. A really, really good series. I'm really happy that book 2 continued all of the things that I enjoyed from book 1 and built on them without destroying or trashing them. So those are my thoughts on volume number 2 of The Faraway Paladin. The next book I'm going to be reading is volume 6 of Yu Kamiya's No Game, No Life. This is the prequel volume that tells about the events during the Great War that happened 6,000 years before the main series story takes place, and is also the source material for the brand new No Game, No Life movie that is going to be coming out very soon, actually. I guess I should have looked up that date before I made that statement, but I know it's, I think, sometime this summer. So that will be my next review. So if you love light novels and you're brand new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe so you can keep up with all of my future light novel reviews, including future reviews of The Faraway Paladin. I really appreciate all of you joining me in this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Till then, bye-bye for now.